Okay, today we're going to talk about Chapter 15, Lesson 1, The Rise of African Civilizations. So, the first thing we always talk about, right, is geography, because that is what drives where people settle and then what kind of lifestyle they live, right? So, there are four major geographic zones of Africa. Um, Starting in the very center, you'll see on the map the green area. That is the rainforest, and it is along the equator, and it is about 10% of Africa's land area. Um, we do know that, obviously, I'm sure you know, it rains a lot, right? And it's quite humid and hot. It's, of course, right along the equator. And it's difficult to farm there. You have to, clear the land, but it is possible. And usually they would do things like yams, okay? Something that's root crops, okay? Um, if you go out on both the north and southern side of that green, you'll see the pink, right? Those are grasslands. So 40% of all of Africa is grasslands. And the more technical name is savanna, which is tropical grasslands, and occasional small trees and scrubs, so it's not just grass. So kind of think of like what you think of Africa with the lions and right, that kind of thing. Um, there is, and I showed this in the second picture, kind of a second type of grassland. It's kind of a transition period between the tropical grasslands and then the deserts. So it's called the Sahel, and it's a drier grasslands, right? So it's harder to farm there than because, of course, it's getting drier and we're getting towards desert. Okay. And let's see, what else do I want to tell you about that? Um, High temperatures in the savannas. There is rain, but it's kind of uneven. But you can farm there and herd and things. So historically, right, people lived in the grasslands and herded cattle and things like that. Um, Also, even in the Sahel, you can, um, but it is again like a little bit more difficult because there's less water. Okay, in the Sahel, they are usually more hunters and herders. Okay, because the farming would be more difficult. And then, of course, deserts. 40% of Africa is deserts. You in the map, you can see that's the yellow areas. Sahara Desert is the largest desert in the world. And there is another one down in the southern part, the Kalahari Desert, you might have heard of. Okay. And of course, deserts is going to be a difficult place to, you're not going to be able to farm, right? There's very little water and very difficult to survive in the desert. Okay, so you can see they're going to, why people settled where they did. The last group is the Mediterranean, which is the very edges, northern and southern tips, and that would be like a orangey color in the map. And you can see that that is the best climate, right? Most mild, adequate rainfall. So you're going to be able to farm well there, but look how little it is, right? So a lot of people are going to try to stay in those areas um, for obvious reasons, right? Okay, so, and that is where there's going to be a large supply of food and therefore big population centers. Okay, all right. So one thing that's hard to show kind of on a map is that Africa is actually covered in a series of plateaus. A plateau is a higher area of mostly flat land. There in the plateaus, you can have mountains and valleys and lakes and things like that. One of the most famous physical features of Africa is the Great Rift Valley, and I have a little video to show you about that. Um, Basically, um, this rift was formed right from the tectonic plates moving apart. I'm sure you've learned about that in science. And it's a huge slash, basically, That's in the bottom picture, that red area, right, trying to show you that Rift Valley. Okay, and also there's river systems, of course. People settle along the rivers. We talked about the Nile quite a bit in the previous chapters with Egypt. And then in the west there, you can see there's also the Niger River. Okay. So they're going to definitely, live along the rivers too. So you'll see population in there. Okay. So let's talk about trade. So the Berbers were the ones who figured out that you can cross the Sahara Desert. It's very difficult, but they were living in the northern part of Africa, right along the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Um, they realized that if they could cross across the desert, there are riches to be had there in the west. This map is a little bit hard to see, but in that western side where you see the pinks and the yellows, right? Those you will notice they find gold. So there's gold mines there, salt mines. So it's worth the effort to try to cross and bring those things back to the Mediterranean area, right, where you can then ship them and trade with Europe and Asia, right? So the Berbers, they had been doing it early from about like 400 BC, and they had originally, of course, tried to do it with donkeys and horses, but these animals are not going to survive very well, obviously. So a lot of times they died on the way. So what ended up really helping was when they started trading with the Romans, they were introduced to the Central Asian camel. And that was about 8,200. And that's going to greatly change trade. And of course, camels are much better suited for the desert, right? Their humps can store fat. So they can travel for many days without water. And so they would either eat them, they're a source of food, and also, of course, they're a way to travel. Okay. So the Berbers are going to become major traders, having these caravans of camels going across from North Africa to West Africa. Okay, and like I said, there's gold there, and they start bringing the gold back to the north and then trade, right, Europe and Asia. And of course, the other places, Muslims and Christian rulers in those areas are going to really want to have that gold. Other things in West Africa, you also had ivory, spices, leather, ostrich feathers, enslaved people. Sometimes people mistakenly think that like the Europeans are the ones who started slavery, and actually that is not true. It did help spread it, right? And our experience with the Americas is that. But unfortunately, Africans were trading each other, right? We've talked about how that was a very traditional thing, that when you lost in a war, right, you would be taken prisoner of war and then turned into a slave. So they just would take them as kind of a commodity to trade, and they would trade with the Europeans and everything by bringing them to the northern Africa. Um, let's see, what else do I want to tell you? Other things, and of course, the people in the West, right, will also want what they can get from the North. So their cloth, weaponry, um, paper, books, horses, things like that they don't have in the West, they want, okay? Also, I forgot to mention also the salt mines were a big thing too. Remember, not just gold. I mentioned gold, but of course, salt is also, and remember back then, it's not just for taste, right? It can preserve your food. So salt is very important back then. All right. So the other thing, of course, that's going to happen with trade is Islam is also going to come to West Africa. We've talked about this, how religion is spread through trade, right? And so that's going to happen in this area too. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about some of the major kingdoms that grew up from all this trade. So the first one I want to talk about is in West Africa, Ghana. And Ghana it started early, around 80, 400s, but they really got really big by the 800s, 900s, okay? And so, like I said, they were close by to the salt mines and the gold mines. The interesting thing about Ghana is that they actually did not own the gold mines, but they were located on the crossroads of the trade that was going. Right. And so when the Northerners came and wanted to trade for gold or salt, they had to pass through Ghana. And the king of Ghana was a genius, and he said, "You can only come through if you pay a tax." And so even though the Ghanans didn't actually own the gold or the salt, they made a bank, right? And they made a lot of money off of that. And the way that they made sure that everyone paid it was they made sure they had a really well-trained army to enforce it. They also did know how to, they had iron ore, and so they were able to make iron weaponry, right? So they were able to supply their army. And, salt, like I said, was in high demand. And so people were willing to pay the tax, right, to go and trade. So, it worked out, and Ghana got to be a huge trading empire, even though they didn't own the stuff themselves. Okay, Mali, let's talk about too. So about 80, 1100s, Ghana's trade got disrupted from some invaders from the north, and it fell apart. And so as Ghana weakens, right, other groups are going to look for opportunity in that area. And so a small state called Mali conquered what was left of Ghana, and they created a new empire, okay? And um, there were storytellers, griots, they call them, and they would say that there was a king who really made this happen. And Sendia, let's see if I can say this, Sendilata, Sendi, Sendiatalata, I think. Um, Sendiata, and then it's, I think, Kaita, if I remember. Okay, and so he was nicknamed, I remember him more by the Lion Prince. Okay, and so he extends their territory, he conquers, and they make this big trading city. You might have heard of it, Timbuktu. And he is now in control of those gold mines that we were talking about before in West Africa. And Mali gets really wealthy again off the gold and salt. Unfortunately, Mali doesn't survive very long. We'll talk about another famous king, Mansa Musa, later. But he dies in, let's see, I think it was 1337. Yeah. And so unfortunately then Molly doesn't, goes away. But we'll talk about how that happens a little bit later. Okay, another one I want to talk about. After Mali is weakened, then a new state, breaks away and tries to make their independence and get, control. And so the Songhais. This is, there's again a particular person who gets credit. Um, Sunni, let's see, no, it's not Sunni Ali. Yeah, Sunni Ali. He is the ruler, and he takes control of Timbuktu. Remember, I told you that really famous trading city. And he uses their location right there on the river, and then he extends it. He takes control of the salt mines, and pretty soon he again has the control of the salt and the gold. Okay, so this now becomes the biggest empire in this area. Um, Again, then eventually, so we're eventually around the 1600s, they're going to get invaded, right? So of course you see everyone wants this control. So it's kind of like almost like gang territory, right? Everyone wants this new, um, area. So anyway, let's see. There's another one I want to talk about in the east. So let's switch over and talk to that. Axum, which I mentioned to you earlier when we were talking about the Kush. I don't know if you remember. Okay, so remember how in East Africa there was the Kingdom of Kush on the Nile, remember? And Axum was on the Red Sea there, if you look at the map. So that's a really great location for trade, being right there on the Red Sea, right? It's a trade route. Linking it to the Mediterranean, to Africa, other parts of Africa, to India. And so they export things like ivory, incense, slaves, of course, for exporting to other places. And it imports things from other places like olive oil from Greece, right? And metal goods and cloth. And so they get really rich and they really want to control that area and all the trade routes. So they fight the Kush. I don't know if you remember, I mentioned that. They fight the Kush and they are able to control that area. And therefore, they have all the trade routes. They can go to the inland part of Africa. And that's going to be important because there's a lot of things that from the interior of the country that they can then be, shipping out to the Mediterranean and to other places. Okay. The other thing that's famous for Axum is their king also made Christianity the official religion, which is surprising, right? Like kind of he himself was Christian, so of course he makes that the official religion. And later, of course, with more trade, they also introduce Islam. Okay, and so both of those are going to be there. All right, and then the last thing, the coastal states. There are a lot of traders on the Arabian Peninsula and Eastern Africa. This picture is of a dhow, and that's a type of boat, and it's an African boat. And many Muslim traders would settle on the Indian Ocean on East Africa, and so you see a lot of mixing then of ideas there, and they are going to set up a lot of trading ports down the coast. And so I mentioned there in the screencast some of the famous ports. You might have heard of them: Mogadishu, Kila, Mombasa, and Zanzibar. Okay, and then the last big one I want to talk about is Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was another major empire that grew up. Um, they are a little more in the southeast part. They were trading with inland states to get copper, which was big there, and gold. And they became major coastal traders. um, Silk, glass beads, carpets, pottery, right? Those are all the things they can get from outside places. And they want things that are from the interior of the country: copper and gold is the minerals there, ivory, coconut oil, and of course slaves. And so Zimbabwe also becomes a major trading empire.